you ready to start? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Center's May Coffee Morning. We are very excited to be here today. It's our first coffee morning of the spring semester. We have taken a new format. We are running both a small live audience. Thank you for those of you who came today, and we are streaming online. We are really hoping that as the restrictions and advisories from the Taiwan government become a little looser and lighter, we might be able to have more of our past coffee morning format where there will be more people allowed to attend in person. But for now, we're bringing it to you online through our new YouTube channel. We just want to let you all know that the center is open this summer. We will be running all of our normal counseling programs and a whole new package of summer activities, including tours and classes and things people can join. So we just want everyone to know we're here for you, to continue to stay in touch with us, watch our Facebook page and our website for upcoming activities and events. And now I'm going to just pass this along to Miriam Meidinger to introduce our program. She's our coffee morning coordinator and volunteer. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. From me as well, just a very quick introduction. Well, thank you for being here for this very special coffee morning. And I would like to thank our sponsor, Santa Fe, who always supports the center for the coffee mornings and throughout the year for various events. If you need more information about Santa Fe, please do check out their website, santaferelo.com. They currently have some promotions for your international move. They do on-site pre-move surveys and more information, as I mentioned, on their website. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce Günter Whittome, who is our speaker today. He's going to talk to us about his experience, his journey to be learning Taiwanese. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Good morning, or Ngao Za in Taiwanese. So I will use the next 45 minutes or so to give you a brief over this side. Okay? Okay. So I'll use the 45 minutes to give you a brief introduction into Taiwanese, what kind of language it is, and my experience in learning it. Maybe you might wonder why would I want to learn Taiwanese, because actually you can get by perfectly with Mandarin in Taiwan, which is basically the case, yes, but maybe I'll just give a brief introduction into my background, so maybe then you will understand this way, okay. Then you will maybe understand better why I got interested in learning Taiwanese. Okay, well, I actually come myself from a bilingual background. I was born in the UK, but I went to school and university in Germany, and I've got an MA in Chinese studies. I studied Chinese in the 1980s in China, and I came to Taiwan for the first time in 1985 to Foreign University, and since then I've been working full-time as a translator and interpreter for Chinese, English, and German. I moved to Taiwan in 2003 and have been living here ever since. And because I live here long-term, I had the idea that I wanted to learn the language, which is actually the real mother tongue for many Taiwanese people, especially those in the middle and older generation, and even more in middle and South Taiwan, maybe more than here up in the north. Taiwanese is their real mother language, and they only learned Mandarin at school. So in 2009, I started learning at Taiwanese at Mary Knowles Language Center, which is near Taipei Main Station. That's actually the language center of a Catholic missionary organization from the US, and they have very experienced teachers, very experienced in teaching Taiwanese and Mandarin to foreigners. And 2 years ago, I took an exam at Cheng Kung University in Tainan just to give it a try, what level I had reached in the meantime, so I'm now officially certified at level B1. Okay. Yeah, and the initial idea that I wanted to learn Taiwanese, actually, I had the idea already in the 1980s when I came to Taiwan, because I was already relatively fluent in Mandarin, but I was invited to Taiwanese families, and then they obviously spoke Mandarin to me, but I observed that when they speak among themselves, they would often speak Taiwanese, and I really didn't understand a word. And I actually liked the sound of the language, so I thought that maybe sometime I will learn it myself. And because I moved to Taiwan in 2003, that's when I wanted to give it a serious try. And there are other objective reasons for learning Taiwanese. Well, as I pointed out, it's the real mother language of many Taiwanese people, approximately 16 million, although with various degrees of fluency. I mean, especially younger people, they may be able to understand or speak Taiwanese to a certain level, especially here up in the north, but they may not be really very fluent. And then the language variant that is spoken here in Taiwan is very similar to South Hokkien. Hokkien is just the local pronunciation of the province of Fujian in China. And so this included the speakers of Hokkien in Fujian province and ethnic Chinese in Southeast Asia. Actually, the language is spoken by approximately a total of 50 million people. So I think it's very useful for long-term residents in Taiwan. And it has the image of being a very complicated language, especially because of its tonal system, which is more complicated than Mandarin. And for me, it was just a challenge. I just wanted to try if it is learnable. And it was a new experience to learn a language which is not fully standardized and which is not the official language in any country. Okay. And these are some photos that I collected during the last years whenever I saw something written in Chinese characters, which apparently doesn't make sense when you try to read it as a Mandarin word, but they do make sense when you read them as a Taiwanese word. For example, a simple one here that on the top right, that's a locally produced coffee machine, and the brand is called Gabi. And actually, Gabi is the Taiwanese version for cafe, for coffee. Or here on the top left, the two encircled characters, if you read them in Mandarin, it's Zhua Long, which literally means grab the dragon. Doesn't make any sense. So if you read them in Taiwanese, it's pronounced Lia Ling, and it means to give someone a massage. So what does that have to do with the dragon? Well, actually, because the Taiwanese, they see a parallel in the shape of the human spine with the dragon. It reminds them of the shape of a dragon. So if you lie on a bed and a masseur tries to give you a massage on your back and grabs your back here and there, it's like grabbing the dragon. So when you see grab the dragon, that's a place where you can get a massage. And this is an example just here around the corner. I think many of you will know the Shidong market. And so this just outside the market, it's, if you pronounce it in Taiwanese, it's Cai Qia, which means vegetable market. So actually you find examples of Taiwanese on road signs and in everyday life in many places. Okay. Yeah, so when I decided, okay, now I'd just like to show you a few maps to show you the relationship of Taiwanese to other Chinese language variants. Okay, this is just supposed to be a linguistic map, not a political map. Just a map of related languages. You see this vast brown area, which is the areas of China where actually only Mandarin is spoken with different accents, but basically Mandarin. Of course, Mandarin is also spoken in these areas, but that's a recent phenomenon. Traditionally, these areas use other language variants, and I prefer to use the term Chinese language family rather than dialects, because the level of mutual intelligibility is comparable to the language families of Europe. For example, the Romance languages, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, they are related to each other, but they are distinct languages. And these languages are also related to each other, but to a different extent, but they are not mutually intelligible. So what is interesting for us in this context is this gray area, which is labeled Min. Min is just the short, the abbreviated name for the province of Fujian. So it comprises Fujian province and a small eastern part of Guangdong province, Hainan Island, and Taiwan. And Min is subdivided into several other mutually non-intelligible variants. Okay, so there's Eastern Min, Northern Min, Southern Min, and Eastern Min would be the green area, which in Taiwan is only relevant as it is spoken on the Matsu Islands. This would be Northern Min, and this light blue area is Southern Min. So the local language spoken in these areas, they are mutually intelligible. What is spoken in Eastern Guangdong to some extent, but there's no problem with the Southern Hokkien spoken in Fujian. Maybe just some differences in accent and in vocabulary and usage. And this is, and the variant spoken in Taiwan has developed separately from China since, not only since 1945, but actually since 1895, when Taiwan became a Japanese colony. Due to this separate development, the variant spoken in Taiwan came to be labeled as Taiwanese since about the mid-20th century. And the relation to Fujian is because most forefathers of the local Taiwanese, they immigrated from the coastal provinces of China to Taiwan in the mostly in the 17th to 19th centuries. Oops, okay, I'll skip this one. Yeah, there are different accents. Yeah, and this I found this quotation, which I find quite interesting and cute. This is from the first Imperial High Commissioner to Taiwan, you could say the first Chinese governor of Taiwan in 1722, who came from Beijing, a northerner, and he was sent to Taiwan, and then he found a language which spoken among the locals that he couldn't understand at all. So he had this experience too. So this is the English translation of what he says here in Chinese. In this place, the language is as bird call, totally unintelligible. And then he gives some examples of surnames. The surname Liu in Taiwanese is pronounced Lao. Chen is Dan. Zhuang is Zheng. And Zhang is Diu, totally different. There's my deputy surname Wu becomes Ngo. And my surname Huang does not even have a proper vowel. It is Ng here. Ng is Huang. Okay, so that was, nearly 300 years ago. And the difference is still the same between Taiwanese and Mandarin. Okay, I'll just give you here a few examples to let you understand the difference. In many cases, Taiwanese uses the same words as in Mandarin, and only the pronunciation is different. But there are also many words which are where in Taiwanese you use different words. So this is 自驾 in Taiwanese. In Mandarin it would be 坐车, to take a ride on a bus or whatever. So it's actually the same word, just with a different pronunciation. Or to eat is 家崩. In Mandarin it's 吃饭. Sounds a little bit similar, but only a little bit actually. And then to speak, 恭维 and 讲话 is etymologically the same word, but the pronunciation is very different. And then it becomes even more distinct when different words are used compared to Mandarin. For example, landlord in Mandarin is 房东, and in Taiwanese you say 厝头家. 厝 means it's another word for house. 头家 is what would be in Mandarin the 老板, the boss. And so the boss of the house is 厝头家, it means landlord. Or the fruit that most of us like to eat very much, the mango. In Mandarin it's 芒果, and in Taiwanese it's 酸呀. Totally different. And you see this little n here. This signifies that the syllable is pronounced with a nasal sound. There are many nasal sounds in Taiwanese. Also, some consonants are different from Mandarin. And another characteristic of Taiwanese is because it was influenced by Japanese during 50 years. So there are many loan words from Japanese which are used in Taiwanese but not in Mandarin. So one popular example, a word which is still used very often nowadays is otobai, which comes from a Japanese, an English word which doesn't really exist in English in this version, but which was invented by the Japanese, autobike, pronounced in Taiwanese otobai, and that's what the word that is used in Taiwanese for scooter, because in Mandarin you would say 机车. Okay, so you see from these accents that just as in Mandarin you have tones. So I'll give you a brief introduction into the tonal system. For those of you who have studied Mandarin, you will know Mandarin has 4 tones. Taiwanese has 7. But actually you see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8, but no 6th tone. This is because there used to be a 6th tone, but it has come out of use. But they still count the tones in this way. Okay, so this shows the tone pitches. And some of the tones are similar to those used in Mandarin. The first tone is just is the same actually as the first tone in Mandarin, a high pitch level tone. The second tone is like the 4th tone in Mandarin, a descending tone. And then it becomes a little different. The 3rd tone is one that descends a little bit like the first part of the 3rd tone in Mandarin, just descends a little bit. The 4th tone also descends a little bit. It's very short and stops abruptly with a glottal stop or with a kind of swallowed PTK sound. Then the 5th tone is like the 3rd tone in Mandarin, a descending and rising tone. And then the 7th is a low pitch level tone, and the 8th is also low pitch tone but shorter, and just as the 4th tone it ends abruptly with a glottal stop or these KPT sounds. Okay, so when you've learned Mandarin and you know there are 4 tones, and then okay, Taiwanese have 3 tones more, maybe you will think, okay, I think I can cope with that. But that's not the end of it. Now it gets really complicated, and the complicated aspect is that while in Mandarin the tones are fixed, you learn a word like che, ka, it's the first tone, And no matter in what kind of context you use this word, it's always the first tone, but not in Taiwanese. In Taiwanese, the tones change most of the time according to certain rules. So this shows the standard rules for the tone changes. The first, in a compound word, for example, compound noun, only the last syllable keeps its basic tone, and the syllables in front of it, they change. For example, niao is the Taiwanese word for cat, as mao in Mandarin. But if it forms the part of a compound word and is not the last syllable, then niao changes to niao, seventh tone. And then the same applies to the other tones. The second changes to the first, third and fourth to the second, fifth to the seventh, seventh and eighth to the third tone. I'll just give you a few practical examples of this. Okay, niao is cat, but if you use it in a compound word such as niao bin, literally cat face, that's a term which is used to describe a pockmark face, then the niao changes to the lower pitch seventh tone, so niao becomes niao bin. On the second tone, for example, fire, hui. If it's in a compound word such as train, which in Mandarin would be huo che, in Taiwanese it's the same word actually, then hui changes to the first tone, and then you say hui qia, you don't say hui qia, it's hui qia. And then the same applies to the other tones. Third becomes second, ki is air, but in the word climate, the third tone, ki, this small falling tone, changes to the second tone, ki, hao. And so this is actually one of the main challenges in learning how to speak Taiwanese, and you need a good teacher or good teaching material to practice this again and again and again. Yes, and then, okay, maybe this would be a little too much detail. Maybe for this part, if you have any questions, are there any questions that you might want to ask me now? Or shall I just continue? Okay. There's one aspect in Taiwanese which reminds me a little bit of Japanese. In Japanese, you have these classical readings which were borrowed from... yeah, you have a question?
Is the written language of Taiwanese Chinese the same written language, or is it?
Yeah, that's, well, the written Taiwanese is also quite a complex issue. You can either write it with romanization, just as you use pinyin for Mandarin, and there are various systems for this. What I use here, and is what I learned when I was studying Taiwanese, is called the so-called church romanization. Church romanization because it was invented in the 19th century by Western missionaries, and it's still widely used. And a few years ago, the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, they introduced a slightly modified version of the church romanization, and this Taiwan romanization is used in schools, in teaching, or also in the new Taiwanese channel of the public television. And you can also write Taiwanese with Chinese characters, but there hasn't really been a standard which character should be used for which Taiwanese word. But recently there has been a tendency to standardize this, also promoted by the Ministry of Education. Yeah?
We have a question from the live chat.
Okay.
So Derek is asking, how do you go about about learning those tone changes.
Okay.
Do you practice contrasting sentences where you target some word and the tone changes? Like how, when you need to practice it, the same word with different tones, what exactly is the procedure?
Okay.
Is there a procedure to learn?
Well, I can go back to this slide. Well, the tone changes are indicated by the numbers on the top of the accent. So this shows, the accent shows the original tone of the word, and the number indicates in which tone you should change it. And yes, there are lists of words in the textbooks that you can practice with. There are audio files that you can listen to. And then, of course, if you have a tutor or a teacher, then you just practice with the teacher. And it takes a lot of time and patience, because in the beginning, you keep thinking, oh, this is tone number so-and-so and has to change in which tone. You have to think a lot about it, and it takes a lot of time until you make it more or less automatically. Yes?
Actually, I got two questions. I was wondering if you could just pronounce the different tones so we know what it sounds like. You know, the 7 different tones that you showed us.
Okay.
And also, you mentioned that you prefer to refer to the dialects of China as a language family. How did it end up becoming dialects instead of different languages?
Okay. Well, within the context of China, it's more a cultural or political convention, but they see China as a centralized country, and then they, so to speak, invented a national language. So in the early 20th century, they decided that the dialect of Beijing, Mandarin, the language of the Mandarins, should be the national language. And if you follow the concept of a centralized country, and per definition there is a national language, then all other variants can only be dialects and not languages. And so that's why in the People's Republic they refer to all these different language variants as dialects. And but then are also criteria from linguistics. They are not 100% absolute, but there are clear criteria. The main criteria would be mutual intelligibility. So if two language variants are so far apart that the speakers can't understand each other, then you would assume that it's not a dialect but a separate language. And then another criterion is whether a language variant has been standardized or not. For example, if we take the Scandinavian languages, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, these are languages that are very closely related and actually to a large extent are mutually intelligible. But nobody will doubt that Denmark, Sweden, Norway are independent countries, and they standardized their local variants on their own. So for Danish, you have a Danish dictionary, Swedish a Swedish dictionary, and so they developed into different directions. And so although they are to a large extent mutually intelligible, they are regarded as distinct languages. And to a little extent, this also applies to Taiwanese. It's basically mutually intelligible with the Southern Hokkien spoken in Fujian province. But in China, people are discouraged from using what is called a dialect, and there are no efforts made to standardize them. And in Taiwan, it's different. There's the Ministry of Education, which has published, for example, here, a list of 700 recommended phrases and words, which Chinese characters should be used for certain Taiwanese words. So there are these efforts of standardizing Taiwanese, and that's different from the Hokkien spoken in China. So to some extent, you could also say that the Taiwanese spoken here in Taiwan is developing in a different direction towards being a language of its own. And that's also that's also why most people call the language spoken here simply Taiwanese. Okay.
It's a much more political issue, right?
It's also a political issue, yes?
Between language and dialect, because, for instance, as in Galicia, you talk a dialect that is much closer to Portuguese than to Castilian.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
But they are Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a dialect from a Spanish province, and it's
Yes.
not Portuguese, although it's much more related. So it's much more a political issue than really a language issue.
Yeah, well, yeah, politics and language are often mixed with each other. That's correct. And in Taiwan, this has also been a political issue because after 1945, people were actively discouraged to use local languages. This didn't only apply to Taiwanese, but also to Hakka or the Aboriginal languages. And maybe I can show you another slide. And I actually know from some Taiwanese people when they went to school here 40 years ago, pupils were actually beaten or fined when they spoke Taiwanese at school. Oh yeah, okay. So I'll go to slide 23. Wait, oops. Yes. So the use of the church romanization, which is also called POJ from the Taiwanese abbreviation, and the use of Taiwanese in itself was actually banned between 1955 until martial law was lifted in 1987. So this is a decree from the Taiwan provincial government to the Tainan county government saying that they should stop a certain church in Shanhua Township from using church romanization and the Taiwanese language in the church services and in proselytizing activities. And since 1964, pupils in schools were actually actively punished when they used the local language. And this ban was only lifted after 1987. And so because the local languages were suppressed, then of course after the lifting of martial law, this became a serious political issue, and there were organizations who wanted to revive these local languages. And this has led to a new law only passed fairly recently in 2018, the National Languages Development Act, which stipulates that all the languages of all ethnic groups are equal, and the government must support endangered languages. So these efforts by the Ministry of Education to standardize Taiwanese, there are similar efforts for Hakka and indigenous languages, must be seen from this background. Nowadays, a so-called mother tongue education, 母语教育, which depending on the region, if it's a Hakka-speaking region, then the pupils would receive one lesson per week in Hakka. In others, they would learn Taiwanese or indigenous languages, but it's only one lesson per week. It's actually really nothing. And the teachers, they might just sing some songs, but there's not really much time to really teach it. But there shall be the possibility from 2022 that pupils can choose one of these languages as an elective subject. Okay. Maybe I'll just go back to yes. Okay. This is also one of the challenges that there are often different readings for one word or character, whereas in Mandarin it's mostly the same reading. It's because there is a spoken pronunciation and there is a classical pronunciation, which is a little more closer to Mandarin. The classical pronunciation was borrowed from the official Taiwanese during the Tang Dynasty, because Fujian is a geographically rather isolated region because of the mountain ranges, but during the Tang Dynasty, the administration was very effective and actually also influenced Fujian, and that was the same time when Chinese also spread to Japan, and in Japanese you also have this difference between classical readings borrowed from Chinese and the original Japanese readings, where you also have to know in which case you use which kind of pronunciation. So they can differ quite a lot. For example, cold, the spoken pronunciation is gua, the N again for the nasal sound, and the classical reading is han, which is quite close to Mandarin, han. Or just as in Japanese for the numbers, you have two different readings if you simply count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. 5 is go, and in certain cases, for example, for when you say a telephone number, then you would use the classical reading, which is ngo. And that's one of the sounds that I also found quite difficult in the beginning. In Taiwanese, you have the ng sound, the ng. It can be at the beginning of a syllable, not only within or at the end of a syllable, and it took me quite some time to get used to that. Yes, and then there are lots of loan words in Taiwanese, which are used here in Taiwan, but not in Hokkien and Fujian. There's a list from the Ministry of Education of 172 loan words from Japanese. It doesn't sound like a big amount, but these are words which are used very frequently. For example, aluminium in Mandarin is lu, but in Taiwanese they say alumi, which comes from the Japanese word. Or to drive backwards in Mandarin is dao che, and in Taiwanese you say baku, which is borrowed from Japanese and originally comes from the English word back. Or for example, a necktie in Mandarin is ling dai, and in Taiwanese it's called nekudai, which is borrowed from Japanese, and you can easily guess that it originally comes from necktie. And there are also some words which have been borrowed from Aboriginal languages and Hakka, but mainly from Japanese. Okay. Yeah, and then you just asked about the writing systems. So when I started studying Taiwanese, we used this church romanization, just as you would use pinyin when you start Mandarin. And church romanization in Taiwanese is called Beiweiji, and according to this word POJ, it's also called the POJ system. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a slightly modified version which is now promoted by the Ministry of Education. And this is just a sample page from this book of 700 recommended phrases. So here you see in the romanization the word, the pronunciation of a Taiwanese word, and then the character with which it's supposed to be written. And this shows the corresponding word and in the characters which are used in Mandarin, and these are some examples. Yes?
Number 13, what would you say that was?
What it means?
What it means? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, in Taiwanese it's ane,
which means like this or in this way. So the corresponding Mandarin word would be 这样 or 如此. So it's actually a word that you hear very often when people speak Taiwanese, when they talk to each other, and then they say, oh, ane, okay. Oh, that's how it is. Oh, okay, I understand. So they always say, ane, ya. Okay. Okay, and then one of the aspects that I find quite interesting when learning Taiwanese is that you understand better aspects of Taiwanese culture, and there are many sayings which are related to traditional agricultural society. Some of these sayings are by today's standards not necessarily politically correct, but they can be quite expressive and funny. I've got a few examples here. This is a saying which is used very often, "Mo he he ma he," which means if there's no fish, I'll make do with shrimps. It sounds a little illogic nowadays because people nowadays would regard shrimps as a luxury food and would maybe prefer to eat shrimps instead of fish. But in a traditional society, people would prefer to eat fish because it has more meat than shrimps. And this phrase is just used if you can't get what you really want, and then you make do with the second choice. Or this one is quite funny too. 狼能卡，钱细卡. People have 2 legs, money has 4 legs. I think you can imagine what that means. Okay, and or for example, this one, 碰紅水雞睇無吧, which means a blown up frog. When you slaughter it, there's no meat, which is referred to people who talk big, but there's nothing behind it. Okay, so this is really fun studying these kind of sayings. Here are some early examples of written Taiwanese. This is a picture that I took myself in Danshui. It's the gravestone of Reverend Mackay's wife. Reverend Mackay is a famous missionary from Canada. He was very active in northern Taiwan in the 19th century. You certainly know the Mackay's Memorial Hospital, which also has to do with him. So here you see actually this gravestone and the name of his wife written in church romanization, Diu Chang Mia, born in Ngogok Ki. I think this would be present-day Wugu. And as this was written in the Taiwanese period, it says died in Taihoku. Taihoku means Taipei. And this is an example from 1885, the Taiwan Church News from Tainan. They had a publication which was entirely written in church romanization. Okay. Maybe I won't go into too many details now, because I wanted to leave the last 10 or 15 minutes to you to ask questions, and also for the audience who's watching this online, if they have further questions. I'll just mention a few of the benefits, personal benefits of learning Taiwanese, which is also an important part of my motivation to study the language, because you just get a better understanding of traditional culture, and it's easier to connect with local people who would usually perhaps don't have contact with any foreigners because they don't speak any foreign language, and it reduces the distance when you speak to someone in the language which is their real native language and not a language that they acquired through school education. And so actually you make some quite interesting, sometimes funny experience when interacting with local people. I once went to see a workman to have a sofa repaired, and I can more or less judge who would be likely to speak Taiwanese and who wouldn't. I mean, not 100%, but more or less. I thought, okay, well, this guy, I think he will use Taiwanese usually in everyday life. So I approached him, and I spoke directly in Taiwanese to him, and it probably was the first time in his life that ever a foreigner spoke Taiwanese to him, and which was totally inconceivable for him. And so he looked at me totally puzzled, and he replied in Mandarin, 我不会讲英文, 我不会讲英文. I don't speak English, I don't speak English. So I had to convince him that I was actually speaking in Taiwanese to him. Yeah, and sometimes it can happen that people are really, they're really happy to see a foreigner speak their language, and they will give you a special prize, or they might invite you for a meal, or if you're lucky, you might even get a free taxi ride. And this can actually happen. So this is one occasion where I was invited by a guy to a meal. And so in the beginning, I have to keep reminding them, please speak Taiwanese to me, because, I mean, they're not used to speaking Taiwanese to a foreigner. But once they get to know you and they know that you want to learn the language and that you can understand it to a certain extent, then they are happy to have a conversation with you in Taiwanese. Yes, and then when you've reached a certain level, there is the possibility to take an exam, either in Tainan at Cheng Kung University, or an exam by the Ministry of Education. And this is one that I took in 2018 at Cheng Kung University in Tainan. So if anyone in the audience feels like seriously studying Taiwanese, there are some institutions and good tutors where you can start to learn Taiwanese at Shida or TLI, which also has a branch here in Tianmu. But I suppose it happens quite rarely that foreigners approach them and say, I want to learn Taiwanese, so you would have to inquire whether they can arrange classes now. I know that Mary Knowles Language Center, they always accept foreigners who either want to learn Taiwanese or Mandarin, and also a private tutor with her website who I could also recommend. Yeah, so just to wind up, I'll give you a few simple phrases that you can use in everyday life. So, ni hao in Taiwanese is li he. Do you want to try? Li he. I think that's not too difficult. And then good morning is gao za. Okay, literally it means something like it's really early, so you should. It doesn't maybe not necessarily nowadays, But in an agricultural society, people would really get up very early in the morning, and that's the traditional way to greet someone in the morning. And then another way to greet someone during daytime, especially around midday, is a traditional way, simply as a greeting, is "Have you eaten?" Because in maybe several decades ago, it wasn't necessarily the case that everybody had enough to eat. So it was really a serious question to show concern for someone. So you would greet someone saying, "Jia ba bui," "Jia ba bui," which in Mandarin would be 吃过了没. Sometimes people also say this phrase. So in Taiwanese, 家爸不. Okay. So if you have any questions later on, this is my email address. So you're welcome to contact me if you like. And otherwise, I thank you for your attention. Or in Taiwanese, 感謝大家. And thank you very much. And I think we can use the rest of the time to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Günter. Really appreciate it. Does anyone have any more questions? I have just a few for you personally from online, but do you have any questions here? No? Well, we had yes, please.
How did your Mandarin helped you with Taiwanese? Because it seems so far apart, so different. Did it help you at all?
Just because it's difficult to hear the question from the audience, I'll just repeat it. So the question was, did Mandarin help you learning Taiwanese? Essentially.
Well, it helped me a little bit because I was already familiar with the concept of a tonal system. It's just more complicated in Taiwanese. And some of the vocabulary is similar, but only some. So sometimes you can guess a meaning, but sometimes the guess can be wrong because there are also many false friends. So it helps a little bit, but not too much. And it's certainly not a precondition that you have to have a knowledge of Mandarin before you can learn Taiwanese. You can learn Taiwanese anyhow.
Any other questions? One question which was asked was your own experience. You studied at Maryknoll, or you learned there, and when did you start with Taiwanese? Okay. And do you consider yourself fluent?
Okay. Well, I more or less began in 2008. I bought some teaching material for myself and thought I'll give it a try to see how far I can get by myself. And I soon found out that I didn't get very far that way. And also maybe the teaching material that I had at the time wasn't that good. And because the tones really need practice with someone who can tell you how to do it properly. And that's when I found Maryknoll's Language Center in 2009. And then I started with these 4 lessons a week on a one-on-one basis. And I still have lessons nowadays. And I'm now focusing on learning how to read and write Taiwanese with Chinese characters. Okay.
Let us give Günter another round of applause. Thank you very, very much for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So Günter is still here for a little bit. So if you want to grab a coffee, talk to him, asking about his experience, feel free. How are you? Sorry that we were shoving you around. We only realized after a while.